Hey there, Gabfest listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. So whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence. Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. July 11th, 2024, the even George Clooney has abandoned Biden edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast here in Washington, D.C., where the heat has slightly broken, thank goodness, from New Haven, Connecticut, where she's gotten her summer colors now. She's in her full, rich summer colors, Emily Bazelon. Hello, Emily, the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School.
Hey, David. Hey, John.
Hey.
And from Manhattan, the Gotham, the seat of power in America, John Dickerson of CBS's Daily Report. Hello, John.
Hello. You were talking about weather or heat. That new heat island report that came out on Wednesday, New York is 9.8 degrees hotter as a result of its urban environment than the actual temperature.
Woof.
Yeah.
Woof.
So there you go. I mean, in general, not just today or not just recently. So if you're coming to New York, pack a small towel for the perspiration.
This week on the Gabfest, President Biden soldiers on, resisting pressure to withdraw. Will Democrats figure out a way to knock him out, or are they just going to resign themselves to running him against Trump in November? Then Trump gears up for his nomination in Milwaukee next week. What has he done to the GOP platform? What is Project 2025? We're going to talk about the state of the Trump campaign as the convention approaches. Then a strange new respect for Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. We are going to talk about a justice who had a very interesting junior year on the court. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. George Clooney is a pretty good writer, or he has pretty good ghostwriters. So George Clooney had an op-ed in the New York Times, the nth number, the 368th op-ed written in the New York Times or in other major newspapers about why Biden needs to step aside. And, it's silly when a Hollywood celebrity is somebody you're quoting on politics. But I did think that one of the things that Clooney said was so telling, which is that not only are we not going to win in November with Biden, we Democrats won't win the House. We Democrats are going to lose the Senate. And then Clooney goes on to say, this isn't only my opinion. This is the opinion of every senator and Congress member and governor I've spoken with in private. Every single one, irrespective of what he or she is saying publicly. So, John, President Biden has not yet wilted in the face of the overwhelming media pleas that he drop out and underwhelming political pleas that he drop out of the race. But is what Clooney said, that everyone in private actually agrees that this is a disaster waiting to happen, is that true, or is that some sort of Hollywood exaggeration?
I think that's the secondarily most important thing he said. The most important thing he said, and the problem for the White House, is that he relied on personal experience and said, I've known Joe Biden for a while, and this was not even the Joe Biden of 2020. And the person you saw on the debate stage is the diminished Joe Biden. That is the diminished Joe Biden of my recent experience with him, because Clooney was a part of the star-studded Hollywood fundraiser for Biden. Michael Douglas also came out and said a version of the same thing. There are now a fair number of people, and there's now been a lot of coverage in the press about people who said, I thought it was maybe a one-off when I met with him and he seemed diminished. But now they pile up. So that is, I think, and I'll get to your question, but that's a problem because it goes to the central question of whether he can manage, not just whether he's going to lose, but whether he can do the job, and whether there's been a cover-up, and whether the Biden people who do spend time with him every day know that this was a problem and didn't do anything about it. Now to your other question, yeah, there are a lot of people who are freaked out in private but don't want to say so out loud for a variety of reasons. I mean, what Clooney said and what others have said out loud is you can't go back. you can't undo your claim, which is that, he has diminished capacity. And that's, that could be career ending or modifying or altering for people who want to stay in the Democratic Party, and need all of the people who are still supporting Joe Biden or might still support Joe Biden. Nevertheless, we've seen now 2 senators as of Thursday call for Biden to drop it, 2 Democratic senators, 9, I think, members of the House, including some in competitive districts. And that matters because one of the things additionally that worries people is not just about Biden's ability to beat Trump, but about the down ballot effect. So you saw the Cook Political Report this week take 6 races that were toss-ups and move them into the Republican category as a result of what's happened in the wake of Biden's debate. So the fear among Democrats is they won't just lose the presidency, they'll get trounced in both houses.
It is telling, isn't it, that the members of Congress who've been out in front questioning Biden, saying that he should step down, are people in very competitive districts, whereas the support that has been the loudest has been from people in super safe districts, right? So if you have something on the line and you're really worried about whether you might get reelected because of the way your district is drawn, you seem to be a truth teller in this setting.
Yeah, so you have this funny situation where Biden, who has been eyed warily by the most progressive members of his party, now many of them are saying, they've got his back. But that doesn't help much in terms of his political fix.
Why do you guys think that the dam has not broken? There's certainly a drip. There continues to be drips. But Emily, to use your metaphor, the wounded animal limps along. Like, there has not been he hasn't been put out of his misery yet. Why has this? I've used so many metaphors. There's the wounded animal, there's the drip, there's a dam.
I know, it's usually my job to pile up metaphors.
There's the wagons. The wagons are circling. But why has it not broken? Like Biden's resistance or non-resistance is one thing, but why hasn't there been a kind of a more full-throated effort? If Democrats do indeed believe this is a catastrophe waiting to happen, I can understand why we can talk about why Biden is resisting it, but why won't they sort of have maybe it's a collective action problem, like no one wants to be first.
Yeah, no one wants to be first. And I also think the 2 things are linked. Like, as long as Biden is saying privately as well as publicly, I am running for president, only the Lord Almighty can get me to step out, then what? Like, he's the president. He's the leader of the party. They know how much damage they're going to be doing, potentially to themselves, certainly to him if he stays in. They're just, he needs to signal. That's the path, right? Without him signaling, I am open to leaving, it's really hard for them. They
are in a car and the car is moving. And until the car stops, they can't get out or they get injured. And he's driving the car. So, he's in control. And so they can grouse and fuss in the back seat. But until he stops the car, the pain of jumping out is more than they're willing to bear right now. And that's why it's so frustrating and there's so much angst and panic. And it's why you see, what Nancy Pelosi has done is pretty extraordinary over the last week or so. And I ran this by Susan Page, her biographer. I've now done this twice because we've happened to have her on Susan on the show booked each time that Pelosi has done this. But, Pelosi keeps opening the door. I mean, the first thing she said is in questioning Biden's debate performance, she said, was this an episode or a condition? When you are a human being, you don't want to have either. And there you have one of the leaders of the, Democratic Party who has incredible political skills and doesn't often misspeak, basically putting the question, saying it's a valid question and is up for grabs. That's the first time she tried to open the door. Then this week, Biden, who has slammed the door shut and said, I am running, she said, he's going to make his decision.
Yes, that was very funny. That was very funny.
Totally. Like, and maybe he could make another decision.
That's right. He has slammed the door shut and nailed it like in some Roadrunner cartoon. And she's like, he's gonna deal with the door when he deals with the door. So in Pelosi speak, that's basically going about as far as you can go, short of saying he should drop out, to keep the issue alive, to try to get him to reconsider. And, we're in this puzzling moment. And also, we should say there's a Washington Post poll that came out on Thursday that that shows that most Democrats nationwide think Biden should end his reelection campaign. And that was true. People who thought he was too old and shouldn't run were not the elites that Biden has said. I mean, yes, plenty of elites, George Clooney being among them, plenty of elites want him not to run. But in CBS polling and other polling, there are plenty of people who would not be in the elite category, the non-college educated cohort, and also those who make less than $50,000 who think Biden shouldn't run. So this is not just a fantasy of, people waiting for their facials.
I mean, to the contrary, I feel like this is something that is so easy to see and for everybody to have an opinion about. And actually, if you look back at the concerns about Biden's age, they were widely shared before the elites and the press started talking about it all the time. If anything, it's that people were ahead of where the press and the elites were because there was this fear of making too much of something without exactly knowing what it was.
And that is so perfectly put. And the elite and the it's all elites gambit does two things, it seems to me. One, it punches your own people in the nose. Not a good thing when you're on your way to an election pretty soon, right? So it makes the fight inside the clubhouse more vicious. Because essentially you're saying, it all, detached, people who live up on the clouds. It denigrates them for the purposes of winning your argument. Not a good thing within your own party. And it also just prolongs the reckoning, and it discards what was the previous gambit, which was, hey, I'm going to go out there and give an interview with George Stephanopoulos, and it's going to be a rock'em sock'em affair, and I'm going to show you how well I can do this job, the immediate one, which is beat Donald Trump, and then the next 4 years. And no one defending Biden said, you know what? He totally did it. They didn't say what he said when he did his State of the Union or his acceptance speech in 2020, which was, yeah, your expectations were low and he hit it out of the park. Nobody said that. So the elite gambit recognizes the discarding of the previous gambit.
Yeah, although one of the problems is that this is running right up against the very heart of Biden's self-identity, that Biden has always depicted himself as somebody who struggled. He stuttered. He came from nowhere, and people have told him he can't do it, and yet he made it. Although I wonder really how much did people, did actually tell him you're never going to make it, kid? I wonder if that's actually true.
They sure did in 2020, including me. There were lots of people who said there's no way he's going to win the presidency. He's lost twice before. He's a bad politician, and he won. So the biofeedback's pretty strong. Also, in that job, any good president knows to ignore the pundits and the political class, because the pundits and political class are often really wrong.
Can I also just say, we should acknowledge that if he steps aside, we don't know what's going to happen. It's not as if that's some nice, smooth sailing out there. I personally am intensely curious and interested in that. But that doesn't mean that I know that it's all going to go great for the Democrats, right? It's the opposite. It's turbulent water out there. Maybe they'll sort of coronate Kamala Harris and that will be good, or maybe it'll be terrible because it'll piss off all the voters. How are they going to figure out how to limit the number of people who run if they have a mini primary? It's a lot of uncertainties. Again, I'm here for it, but we should acknowledge that it's not as if there's this other door to paradise.
And I think it's a super great point. And I would just say right next to that is the irritation among many Democrats at what they're being told, which is basically, as one put it, shut up and clap. In other words, that there's nothing to see here. There's nothing to discuss. Absolutely. Everybody's level of certainty should be, anybody who has a level of certainty is crazy. And I think one of the things that irritates the people who are curious about Biden and whether he should continue is that they're being told, it is certain, it is true, there is only one way to go, and that is to support Biden. And that's not calming things down.
I feel like that everyone's level of certainty should be low, except I do think people should be pretty certain that barring some extremely significant change in the dynamics of this race, Biden is headed for a loss. That part seems absolutely certain. Now, that's not to say that some dynamic couldn't happen. Trump could do something truly disqualifying, but man, the guy was convicted of a felony, 34 felonies a few weeks ago.
And boy, that changed everything, David.
Yeah, that changed the whole thing. It's so hard to imagine a set of circumstances which would fundamentally change this race. And the only circumstances that have changed is that the perception of Biden has gotten massively worse because of his doddering performances. So I think it's a sign of how frightening it is that Democrats who are, normally like pretty cautious, reasonable people are like, man, it is better to take the risk of who the hell knows what happens than it is to sit by and zombie walk into a defeat in November.
And just to add to what you're saying, it is not just one night, one bad performance, but the possibility that each incremental performance repeats it and therefore exponentially compounds the existing problem, as Emily said, that was there even before this debate.
Well, it's about downside and upside, right? It's not about certainty. It's that the potential upside of another candidate seems higher, and the downside of sticking with Biden seems like baked in.
Yeah. A very small point, Emily. I noticed you used that word coronate, which I've also seen used. Where did that word come from? I don't think that's a real word. Isn't the word just crown? When did coronate become a word? I've seen it. I know. I've seen it. I think
you don't think that coronation is a word? You don't think it's a verb? To coronate? That
to
doesn't
put a
sound
crown
weird
on someone's
to me.
head in an official ceremony that makes the person king or queen, etc.
I know, but isn't it to crown them? You crown somebody, and that is a coronation. You don't coronate somebody.
To put a crown on someone's head in an official ceremony that makes that person king or queen is to
You just
coronate.
Googled it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a real word. It just sounded and looked so weird to me. I thought people had taken the noun of coronation and backfilled a verb into it. But I am wrong.
You don't read enough fairy tales, clearly.
So just to close this out, of the ideas that you guys have heard about, let's posit a world in which Biden does drop out in a week or two. The ideas for what the Democrats can do, what seems most interesting to you, John?
Well, I kind of sketched it out before, which is it contains at least these component parts, and somebody has to write the stitching language. But one is an elevation of all that Joe Biden has done, which does a couple of things. It begins right away the process of getting off of Biden and on to the things that Democrats are telling voters they're going to be able to do for them. And you can talk about infrastructure, and you can talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, and you can talk about insulin and all the things that he did as you celebrate him heading out the door. That does two things. I think then you transfer that, if you're Democrats, into a massive celebration of the things that Democrats are going to do. It also returns some of the focus to Donald Trump. In the fall, you have the sentencing in the New York case. In Jack Smith's case, you're going to have the evidence put forward about what is an official and unofficial act. Those will be new pieces of information for the electorate. And then you have a rallying, and you put to bed all of this anger that's happening inside the Democratic Party behind a set of ideas that they all can remind themselves that they believe in. And that could all be done in Chicago with all of the background music of, boy, this didn't turn out like 68. Look, it's a moment of relative harmony after chaos.
Wait, but sorry, John, you didn't answer the question, which I thought I was asking, which is literally what is the process by which you go from committed delegates with Biden to a new nominee? Like, is there a series of debates? Is there a series of caucuses? Like, it's just all yelled out of the convention? Like, what do you think of the way to do it is?
Oh, well, the best way to do it would be if everybody agrees that it's Harris, and Biden accepts this plan and basically hands his delegates over to her, and it's a big celebration of having, behaved differently than the Republicans, and we'll get to that in the next topic, are behaving with their nominee. Then there are other ideas about opening up the whole convention, and that seems far more risky with less reward, frankly. But that would require basically Biden to say, I'm releasing my delegates and they're up for grabs, instead of saying they should go to Kamala Harris. Then you'd have like a mini primary.
Yeah, I pro mini primary. I think that just the handoff to Harris is going to make people feel saggy and disenfranchised. Like, she wasn't the most popular or even super popular Democratic primary candidate. I think that they should throw it open to some kind of mini primary. I agree that it's not like clear how to map that out, but you could have some ground rules about no negative campaigning and some thresholds for a couple of debates or town halls or something before the primary. They could get it together to do that. But that's where the clock ticking matters a whole lot, I think. John is looking so skeptical.
No.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
No. I was just thinking through, because what happens in primary debates is it's the tyranny of small differences. And so you could say no negative campaigns, but if you want the presidency, you got to go do it. And so there would be significant negativity. And I think, though, one of the things I heard in your reluctance, I think that what you say makes sense. I think you have another problem for Harris, which is that people might say, hey, if we've all agreed that there was this ongoing problem with Joe Biden, what was your role in all of this, Madam Vice President?
Not to mention that the Biden record, especially on inflation, is unpopular. And so if you can ditch that because you weren't part of the Biden administration, that might help you win the general election.
I don't think anybody gets out from under that. You have to just say, look, we took on a tough thing. There's inflation all over the world. It's getting better now. And I mean, I just don't think a Democrat is going to be able to wriggle out from under the economic record of the incumbent, even if they're a governor.
This episode of the Gabfest is brought to you by ZBiotics. There is now a game-changing product to use before a night out with drinks. It's called ZBiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, it is tough to bounce back the next day. So you have to make a choice. You can either have a great night or a great next day. But ZBiotics is a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you will feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/Gabfest to get 15% off your first order when you use Gabfest at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/Gabfest and use the code GABFEST at checkout for 15% off. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Public.com. If you're looking for a simple yet sophisticated investing experience, check out Public.com. From stocks to options, bonds to crypto, it's all there. You can even earn an industry-leading 5.1% APY on your cash. Public is trusted by millions of investors, and NerdWallet just gave Public 4.6 stars and called it an impressive experience. Sign up in 2 minutes at Public.com. All your investing in one place. This is a paid advertisement for Public investing. 5.1% APY is as of June 17th, 2024, and is subject to change. NerdWallet overall rating 4.6 out of 5 as of May 2024. Full disclosures in the podcast description. The Republican convention takes place next week in Milwaukee, anointing Donald Trump as the nominee, and somebody, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Doug Burgum, if you believe the reports, one of them as his running mate. Trump has been cannily quiet for the most part and fairly out of sight since the debate. He's enjoying the spectacle of Democratic self-immolation, but we wanted to sort of check in with this worst of all possible potential next presidents and talk about what the convention might hold, but also about Project 2025, which is this growing attention to what Trump is planning for his next term. So let's start with the question of, do you think, Emily, that Trump has disappeared intentionally in order to let the Democrats just have a meltdown?
Well, I was really struck by Tim Alberta's reporting in The Atlantic about his campaign, and it suggests that Trump has kind of deliberately, that he's being very strategic and realizing that if he kind of stays out of the foreground right now, the Democrats are spinning on their own in a way that's very helpful. I mean, Alberta's piece also makes you think that the Republicans desperately want Biden to stay in. And it is also true that, Trump this week did start baiting Biden by saying, like, I want to debate you and I challenge you to play golf. Is it a golf match or a golf game? I didn't know how to say
both.
that. Both. Okay.
A round. Let's play a round.
A round of golf. Anyway, so, I mean, it's not like Trump has entirely resisted the spotlight, but I think he has done a smart job. I just generally think he is acting like a person who wants to win the presidency, and being much more disciplined than he was in 2020 or 2016, right? And it was really interesting to read Alberta's reporting about the people running his campaign and how they're thinking about reaching out to young men of color and how like they've kind of eliminated is strong, but they've really pulled back on the kind of ground game of canvassing and knocking on doors in a way that may screw over a lot of local and even state candidates in places like Michigan, where the party is weak, the Republican Party is weak. But it all sounded like they were being pretty savvy about how to try to really boost his numbers and reach out to the groups that they need to win.
He hasn't been that quiet. I mean, it's a relative thing. I mean, he's still giving crazy, having crazy rallies and saying crazy things. Part of it is he's not getting carried live on the cable networks. He's not on Twitter. And the other thing he is doing, which goes to Emily's point, if campaigns are about motivation and persuasion, he's got the motivation taken care of. He's got the most motivated base. Part of the problem with what Biden's going through is he can't get to the persuasion part. He's back at the motivation stage. You want to have your own team locked down. Trump does. And so he's doing a series of things that suggest what we used to recognize as a pretty standard thing in politics, which is you run to the ideologues for your primary and then to the middle in the general. And so what Trump has done recently is he's tried to distance himself from Project 2025 at Heritage, which has a series of things that they feel are objectionable to swing voters. He's softened the Republican platform. You'll remember that last time around, there was no Republican platform. The Republican platform was Donald Trump. But he's done some things so that there will be coverage of how they are in support of IVF. They are not in support anymore of a national abortion ban, things that he previously supported as the Republican nominee. All of this is in an attempt to try to fix his considerable problem with those swing voters. Whether it works or not is one thing, but as a strategic, a lot of people don't even think he has that channel. And that's predicated on this idea that he's going to win back some of these voters he lost, which I always thought, what suburban woman voter is going to think, I didn't like him in 2020, but now that he's been blamed for an insurrection and all these other things he's done, I'm really thinking of backing that guy. However, the polls show people have short memories.
Yeah. And there are plenty of people who didn't vote, maybe, who are now going to be new voters who might vote for him rather than somebody else. So let's talk about Project 2025, John. Since you referenced it, it's gotten a lot of attention recently. So Project 2025 is something pulled together by the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, which used to be, when we were young, was just kind of your normcore Reaganite, hawkish DC think tank, and has become very magnified recently. And they gathered together several dozen conservatives who are mostly former Trump officials. And even the ones who weren't mostly Trump officials were very aligned to the MAGA movement, and pulled together a set of plans for what they proposed a second Trump administration do. I guess it's a Republican presidency in 2025, which would be a Trump presidency. So, Emily, some of the things they have: a simplified and much more aggressive tax system, an incredibly brutal and widespread crackdown on immigration, both legal immigrants and people who are undocumented, just in a whole vast variety of ways that would sort of circumvent Congress, supporting oil and gas, cutting all support for alternative energy, wind, especially murdering NOAA, the main government agency that does research on climate change, withdrawing approval of mifepristone, prosecuting people under the Comstock Act, stripping civil service protections from enormous numbers of federal government employees. So seems just like a regular run-of-the-mill stuff, right?
It's a very dramatic, I think, about 900 pages of like really radically altering the shape of American government and policy. I mean, this is like not some milquetoast document by any means. We should say Trump has tried to distance himself from it in the last week by saying, I don't know anything about this. And also, I disagree with parts of it. But of course, he didn't say which parts. So it's like the perfect kind of deniability where, everyone can imagine the shape of it that they would like Trump to support or oppose. And I mean, it just shows how far right this part of the conservative movement has gone. I mean, one of the things that Kevin Roberts, the president of Heritage, has talked about is how great he thinks Hungary is, right? Hungary is a place that is most known under Viktor Orban for having this like real erosion of democracy and turning very far to the right on things like immigration and LGBTQ rights. And Roberts has hosted Orban and praised him and talked about Hungary as not just a model for conservative statecraft, but the model. And that is an enormous challenge to American democracy. It's just, there is no, independent judiciary in Hungary. The state has taken over all the, security agencies. There are real limits on how much there's a free press. Like, it's alarming.
What strikes me about the 2025 project is that, Trump can try and distance himself, but it exists in a garden or in a field that Trump has created and tended. So he might not like the particular flower that grows in this field, but he has built the field, put down the fertilizer, tended it. And what I mean by that is he thinks of the presidency as something where your staff is defined purely by loyalty. In other words, not policy competence or expertise or temperament or all those things, but purely by loyalty. So if that's the only thing you care about, then all the other stuff is just, whatever. So if it's whatever, then people have all kinds of great ideas in their heads and they want to do them. And so they do this. And so that happened within his administration. The downside, of course, means that when you have an emergency like COVID, you have people who were picked for ideology and political spin talents and not execution and successfully doing their job talents. So that's the first thing, is that he can try to distance himself from the particularities, but he can't distance himself from the way he approaches the government. And then that leads to a second important thing, I think, about both where Trump and Project 2025 overlap perfectly. And that is the way in which they conceive of the executive branch under his future leadership. And I would point to three things. One is Schedule F, which was an effort at the end of the Trump administration to basically take a large section of the bureaucracy and remove the protections for those bureaucrats who are in the job, and that sounds pejorative, but people who work in the executive departments who have certain level of expertise and manage the ongoing business of government. We've talked about this many times before. If Trump can just fire those people, then entire agencies potentially disappear or wither. Or he replaces them with his people who have a different set of agendas. So when you think about why does it matter that you have Donald Trump in office or Joe Biden in office, many of those things that you think about when you think about what government does well or what you'd like it to do happen as a result of these people who are now maybe not going to be in office anymore. There's also the idea of impoundment, which Trump believes, Heritage believes. That means essentially the president doesn't have to spend what Congress tells him to spend. Faithfully executing the laws doesn't mean I have to spend money on dental care as a part of Medicare. If I don't like it, nah. Now, the courts would say, you can't do that. It's Congress's job to make these decisions about spending, and you just have to execute them. Well, Trump just said he had immunity at a level that nobody thought he would get, and the Supreme Court said he did. So it's likely that he uses the impoundment power to not spend money on the priorities people might want a government to spend their money on. And then finally, there's going to have to be a reckoning with the federal budget at some point, which is a series of decisions about what you want the government to do, priorities. So this group and the mindset demonstrated by Project 2025 gives you a sense of how some of those priorities would be sorted when it comes to the great business of trying to allocate money towards what government does. Those are three huge shifts in the executive branch under a future Trump administration.
That was very vivid. I approached Project 2025 and actually the whole conversation about Trump's second term from a different perspective, which actually the perspective of having been a CEO for the past decade. And one of the things that I've learned deeply from being a CEO is that ideas don't matter. Like ideas are unimportant, that all that matters is project management. That anyone who has an idea is valueless unless they have a plan and a way to carry out that plan. And I think what people underestimate about the first Trump term was how much the country was protected from some of the worst aspects of Trumpism by the fact that they were so incredibly incompetent, that they came in without any plan, without people who wanted to carry out a plan. The only place where they had a plan, in fact, was with judges, and they were massively effective. Like they had a plan and they had an infrastructure. And I think what we see, what Project 2025 represents, as well as this whole effort within the conservative sort of farm to find the future employees of a Trump administration, there's this massive vetting that's going on, is they intend to come into 2025, if they are going to be in power with not just with ideas, but with plans to carry out those ideas, and people who have been vetted and known to have the belief system and the kind of willingness to carry those ideas out. And that would make Trump's next presidency a much more alarming prospect for people who, don't want every immigrant to be deported and who do want climate change research to continue, because they will be able to do things in a way they were not able to do things because they now have a plan to do it. And that's what, frankly, terrifies me. The specifics of Project 2025 are just like Looney Tunes, whatever. It's that they have gotten their shit together to be ready to implement stuff like this. That's terrifying.
And they have a leader who is super aggrieved and enraged by the federal government, right? Who felt betrayed in his first term by his more normie Republican appointees and seems pretty determined not to make that mistake again. Now, of course, not all of this will pan out because it's so extreme, but some of it probably will. And we don't know which parts of it, right? And by saying I don't like some of Project 2025, but not specifying, Trump is leaving us to guess, which is the smart strategic thing on his end for him to do. But the notion that it's going to be the same as his first term just seems why would we think that?
That's what I meant by the field and the flower. He's created the field. The conditions are all there for what you say, David, which is a repetition or a recapitulation of the old line that amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. And also one thing I wanted to be clear about from my own is that while the folks that are being listed here in the farm team, creating a farm team that's ready to go on day one is actually best practice in terms of the trying to make an effective federal government. So they have effectiveness in executing, but it is a demolition crew rather than a crew that comes in and operates the machine efficiently. It starts out with a different intent, but I didn't mean to suggest that they might not have real expertise in what their project is.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, the supply chain has been a friend and foe to my company. Can AI make us more resilient? Signed, Supply Chained to Uncertainty.
Hey Supply, here's how AI in the supply chain can help. AI can massively automate data analytics and understand the movement of your goods. AI can point out weak links, market demand trends, optimal logistics, and other important aspects that impact the top and bottom lines for the business. Take the example of a large grocery chain that has hundreds of vendors spread through the country. In some cases, you may need to reroute shipments to other stores, such as in the case of fresh produce, a good that can go bad very fast. Managing such a supply chain is heavily dependent on the data provided, and AI can help optimize this information so that your supply chain works at its optimal levels.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Quince. You ever open your closet and think, why did I buy that? Why do I own that? We've all done that. But with Quince, you're going to see fewer misses and more hits that you're going to be wearing season after season. Quince has all the seasonal must-haves. And the best part is that all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Quince partners directly with top factories, and Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices, along with premium fabrics and finishes. So I just had a delightful experience ordering from Quince, and I'm extremely excited. I got a performance polo in a color. I love wearing performance polos. I got it in a color that I don't normally wear because it was honestly, it was so affordable. And I was like, I could try this color and see if it works for me, this lovely olive color. So I'm just delighted with what I've gotten from Quince. So you should fill your closet with timeless pieces that you'll be wearing for summers to come with Quince. Go to quince.com/Gabfest for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/Gabfest to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Gabfest. Decisions made in Washington affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including the policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation fears, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen. In the early 1990s, there was a term coined by a conservative, and I can't remember who it is, about what happens when a conservative does something that liberals like and goes from being anathema to somebody who's a brilliant philosopher of American life as opposed to a partisan hack. And the term that conservatives said, it's strange new respect. And so Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court Justice, is getting this strange new respect treatment this month. With the end of the Supreme Court term, a lot of commentators who were perhaps more liberal judicial commentators are looking at Barrett and saying, maybe she's different. Maybe she's different because she's not quite as right-wing as we thought she was. So now we accord her a strange new respect. So, Emily, is Barrett, I think Barrett seems to be a lot of fun and seems to be a good human being and well-liked by her colleagues. Has she carved an actually different path this term?
So Barrett is a very conservative Supreme Court justice. Let's be clear about that. In major cases, Dobbs overturning Roe versus Wade, Loper Bright, the decision overturning Chevron, most of the court's decisions, kind of disemboweling or paralyzing regulation at federal agencies. She has been with the conservatives. She voted in favor of giving Trump lots of immunity from prosecution as a former president. What Barrett is doing is writing some often solo opinions that they do two things. They take a narrower view than the conservative majority. Example, the Trump immunity case. That's a little bit middle of the road. And the second thing she is doing is just calling out bullshit from the reasoning in the very conservative opinions, especially on the trajectory of this whole question of this new history and tradition test that we've talked about before on the show. So the court has moved from a kind of more strict, I guess, version of originalism where you look at sources from the founding or from the moment that the 14th Amendment was ratified by Congress. They've moved from that to cherry picking through all of history, the sources they like. And Barrett is not down for this. She was not down for it in Rahimi, which was the gun rights case. She was not down for it in a trademark case that is about free speech in the First Amendment and content-based restrictions. Basically, when can the government decide based on the content of speech that it's not going to be entirely free. And she's writing these smart, cogent, pretty short and readable opinions that say, hey, what are you guys doing? Whether she's talking about Justice Thomas in the trademark case, Chief Justice Roberts in the immunity case. She has a great takedown of Justice Gorsuch in a case about, the EPA's trying to make sure that upwind states are not polluting downwind states. It's really interesting. It's candor. It's not that it's some liberal decision. It's not that she's over there shaking her fist with the three other liberals and three other women on the court. In fact, she chided them in the Colorado case about whether Trump could be on the ballot for being what she saw as too strident and making it seem like the court was not unified. But she's just carving out this path in which she's just willing to more honestly grapple with the issues. And that's interesting. And it's different than Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Roberts. You can especially see this in the guns case. Kavanaugh and Gorsuch wrote these long, I would argue, sort of florid, baggy opinions about originalism and their view of history and tradition, blah, blah, blah. And Barrett just kind of comes through and like kind of cuts through the bullshit. Now she comes up with her new idea of like original contours originalism, which is like the idea that you don't have to go back and find a twin piece of legislation or rule from, 1789. You just have to find something that's in the right mold. And she's kind of making that up because all of this is like made up, but it makes more sense and it's expressed in a sprightly manner.
And is it that this is an academic's approach to law and that's why legal academics like you enjoy it? Or is it that she is actually a pragmatist and that what she's writing is more commonsensical? Like that's what I can't figure out is that what people are admiring is her intellectual integrity or her common sense integrity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a little of both going on. You can feel that she was a law professor, and that's different from Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. And she cares about explaining in a concise way, and I appreciate that as a reader. There is also some more common sense going on. So, for example, in the trademark case, she was like, we've never used this history and tradition approach before. Why should we now? We should be talking about purpose. And there is also the sense of purpose and what actually just like makes sense in terms of regulation in the EPA case. So I think there's a little bit of both going on, though I don't want to suggest this makes her some moderate overall. And also because Roberts, Kavanaugh, no fifth conservative is generally voting with her when she does join the liberal side, it's not leading to different results.
Sorry, what did you mean by purpose? You mean purpose of the law or?
Yeah, like what's the purpose here? What is the point as opposed to like, we're just going to look back and cherry pick the historical sources? Like, what are we trying to do here, folks?
I actually find the looking at Justice Barrett at the end of this term valuable, not for this strange new respect way, but it did reading about this did remind me of how unpleasant some of the treatment of her was when she was nominated. The sense that she was a kind of Christian cultist who, was going to be in the thrall of some freaky deaky church, and that's all she was going to do. And she was just like a baby factory who wrote legal opinions on the side that were informed by some weird set of religious beliefs, which it always seemed like she was painted as a grotesque when she was nominated. And part of it was because the whole process of pushing through a nomination was grotesque, that it was done in this race to the finish way that was pretty unseemly. But it made it these personal attacks on her were unjustified, and they were so based on sort of stereotypes about what people who have religious beliefs are like they were just gross. It was gross. And so it's good. I found it good not just to read about her intellectually now, but just to remind myself, oh man, she did get a bit of a beat down that was completely unfair when she was nominated.
I mean, I think part of the reason for that, David, is that Coney Barrett, when she was nominated from the Supreme Court, people didn't know that much about her. And one quick fact was that she grew up in this small insular Catholic community in Louisiana. And I did some reporting at the time, and I remember trying to talk to people who knew her, and they were saying to me, like, no, like she is an independent thinker, and, she's a law professor. And when you read her law review articles from that time, you get the sense of someone who has like a broad intellect for sure. I do think it was not clear at that moment because she just didn't have that much of a record, whether she was going to be much more like Thomas and Alito, right? I mean, that seemed like a real possibility, someone who was just going to kind of fall into line and say what you need to say to get to the results. And I mean, I was reading the trademark opinions this morning, and she's facing off against Thomas about what the meaning of originalism is. And it's really interesting to see how different their approaches are. It also, of course, makes one think that originalism, like, does not do the things that it's supposed to do in terms of limiting judges and taking out value judgments, because they can't even agree on what it is.
Unless its goal is to be just an accordion file you can slip anything into and expand to surround whatever opinion you have.
I mean, I think the thing about Barrett's treatment was that absent a record, people went ad hominem really quickly. And that was probably not called for. Do you think, Emily, just to close this out, so one of the problems with history and tradition, as we've talked about, is that history and tradition harkens back to a world in which lots of people were not part of the decision making, or they were treated literally as chattel, or they had completely subordinate rights to their husband, their father, their brother, and that makes the whole project of invoking what history and tradition were like just intrinsically corrupt. Because why should we value what people who thought that other people should be slaves? Why should we think that their views on property rights should be respected in this way? Do you think that Barrett as a woman is reflecting any of that, or you're not picking that up?
I'm not really picking that up. I mean, she still is totally down for like originalism and the virtues of it. But I guess I do think in the guns case, she seems very aware that if you really apply this in a rigid way, which again, Thomas wanted to do, that you are going to be stuck with something that is a bad fit for our modern world. And so in that sense, like more broadly, I think there is something to what you're saying. What I don't see is an awareness of this in the area of reproductive rights. I mean, there is the EMTALA case. So, we've talked about this on the show. There was this challenge to Idaho's law, which basically says like a woman has to be dying clearly before you get to have an abortion in Idaho. And Barrett was the one who wrote the sort of Goldilocks in between opinion. This is a case that the court punted on, right? They were like, actually, we're not going to rule on it after all. And Barrett tried to say, well, there's really no clear dispute here because the government, the United States, the Biden administration changed its position in oral argument and the state changed its position, and they're pretty close together here. And so we don't have to do anything about it. But I mean, Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent showed why that was going to leave a lot of women in other states than Idaho around the country still in these emergency situations in which they wouldn't be able to get an abortion. And that was a place in which a moment in which Barrett could have thought about these real world consequences for women, and she's not ready to do that yet. And given her fifth vote in Dobbs, that's not super surprising.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. When you are having a strange new respect for your martini, John, what will you be chattering about?
I will be chattering about the legacy of Pablo Escobar.
Not good, I would think. Probably not.
Well, not good. Many ways, not good. But legendary drug kingpin ruined the lives of probably hundreds of thousands of people. But one of the ways he spent his ill-gotten gains in the 80s and 90s was to buy animals and move them to Colombia. And one of them were these hippos. And when he was caught and killed in 1993, the government seized all of the lions and giraffes and hippos, but they sent most of the animals back to domestic zoos, but they could not send the hippos because the hippos were too dangerous and to move them around was not possible. The problem with the hippos is that they started to reproduce. Not native to Colombia, they became basically a huge threat to other animals, to the environment. And so at this moment, Colombian biologists predict that by 2040, if nothing is done to control the breeding of these hippos, there will be 1,400 of them. They started with 4. And so they have started on basically an effort to not kill the hippos, but basically to castrate the male hippos and keep them from reproducing. And they've done this with 33 so far, and they have they've done it with 8 so far, and they have to get, I think, to 33 in order to feel like they've managed the herd properly.
That would be an unbelievably difficult job to castrate a hippo. Have you ever been next to a hippo? Hippos they're terrifying, and they're so giant. Big you cannot even believe that.
And they have really big teeth. Those teeth, they're enormous.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, bone crushing.
They have to it requires things like military helicopters and it's a huge thing. Like a pilot almost died flying one of the helicopters once to, I remember when we were in Africa and, hippos look like soft and kind of no big deal. And being warned that basically not only can they be incredibly violent, but they're very fast, which you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Ebaz, what is your chatter?
So I was really taken this week by this story about Alice Munro. One of her daughters published an essay. This is Andrea Robin Skinner, about being sexually abused by her stepfather, who was Munro's husband, when Andrea was a child. And it is like a dark story because this abuse I mean, Andrea Skinner told her own father about the abuse when she was a child, but also she told her mother about it when she was in her 20s. And then Alice Munro chose to stay with the stepfather. And this is not a question of whether this abuse happened or was serious, because there are these letters that the stepfather wrote that are just like truly revolting about his attraction to Andrea when she was a child. Anyway, I am an enormous fan of Alice Munro and her stories, and this raises all kinds of questions about all of the insights into especially young women that those stories are full of and how to think of them now. But I was also just struck by how brave it was for Skinner to come forward. She has tried to tell the story before, and Munro's biographer has now said that he knew about it years ago and just decided not to include it or publicize it. It all seems so just like upsetting, and the kind of just the effort to silence Andrea Skinner and the fact that she has like surmounted that, I'm just like truly impressed by. And I was also struck by, she has, I think there are 4 children of Alice Munro, and it seemed like they were all in solidarity at this point about revealing this aspect of their mother's past and super complicating her legacy. And I was glad to see that. And I hope that Andrea Skinner is feeling some sense that, yes, this is an important part of understanding Munro and her work, and she absolutely had the right to come forward and tell her story.
My chatter is about a story I read in the New York Times this week about a crazy episode in Malvern, Pennsylvania, where a bunch of middle schoolers engaged in a group TikTok attack on their teachers. And so over the course of months, it sounds like, a bunch of middle school students created fake TikTok accounts for their teachers, some of which like depicted these teachers as pedophiles, as predators, just as losers in various ways. And it really got out of hand. And so these teachers felt humiliated. They felt targeted by the students. They were targeted by the students. And once this was brought to light, the school appears to have basically felt they could do nothing about it, that it was all stuff that was taking place off of campus, and it didn't involve school hours. And so they effectively barely punished anybody. And the students, at least the students that the Times spoke to, had no remorse whatsoever, literally no remorse, and did not understand how consequential and how painful this had been for the teachers. And it was a shocking story.
Yeah, there was a lot of gaslighting going on. I mean, the reason the school thought they couldn't act are these questions about, this is speech and it's outside of school property and school hours. And what is the, and you want students to have some ability and freedom to express themselves, right? But on the other hand, this just seemed like a terrible failure of parenting. Right. I mean, these were like 12 and 13-year-olds, and maybe they are thinking about it more deeply now. But one really wondered what was going on.
Well, they didn't seem to be. I mean, they kept doing it, and they appeared to have shown no remorse. And when interviewed about it, they showed no remorse. So, I mean, yes, they're 12 and 13-year-olds, but wow, it was astonishing. One other actually thing I wanted to point out: if you're in Washington this weekend on Saturday at 2 p.m. CityCast DC is doing a live taping at Metro Bar, which is right at the Rhode Island Brookland Red Line stop, and we're doing a conversation with people from the DC Office of Planning about the North Capitol neighborhood, and it's going to be really fun. Mike Schaefer, our CityCast DC host, is going to host it. I will be there. So Saturday at 2 at Metro Bar here in DC. Join us for a live taping of CityCast DC. Listeners, please send us your listener chatters. We're actually running a little bit low. We're down to a bare cupboard, so we could use some great listener chatters. That it is my most entertaining thing that I do is read listener chatters. So keep me entertained. Do I not deserve to be entertained? Please email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. And we have a extremely special listener chatter this week, which is that it comes from our very own researcher, Julie Hugan, is a listener, and she sent us a listener chatter. So let's hear Julie cue up Julie's own chatter.
Hello, Gabfest listeners. In the past few weeks, the New York Times reported on romance bookstores and romance writer Emily Henry, and the Wall Street Journal covered Romantasy, which CNN and the Washington Post did earlier this year. And don't get me started on Bridgerton, the Netflix version of a historical romance book series. Despite the decades of deprecation and mockery, romance is historically and perpetually a top-selling fiction genre. Ebooks and self-publishing and book talk have all increased audience, access, and options, as in subgenre inspirational, sub-subgenre Christian, sub-sub-subgenre Amish. Really. I'm a longtime romance reader. My answer to the college application, "What's your favorite book?" question was Lovely Lying Lips. And however and whenever readers find romance, I'm tickled pink to welcome new members to the club. May we all enjoy each and every HEA.
That's all for our episode this week, but wait, there is more. If you liked this episode of the Gabfest, you will love our bonus episode, which is also out now in your podcast feed. We've decided to change up how we're doing Slate Plus, and there's now a Slate Plus bonus episode every week where we do an extra topic, and that will be in your podcast feed. And today we are talking to Emily Wilson, who's the translator of the Odyssey and the Iliad, and one of the most delightful scholars or people you can imagine to talk to. And we're talking to her about the connections between Homer's poems and American politics. It's a really, really fun conversation. It's only available for Slate Plus subscribers. So please become a Slate Plus subscriber. You get, in addition to these bonus episodes, you get discounts to live shows, you get no hitting the paywall on the Slate site, and the pleasure of supporting the Gabfest. So go to slate.com/Gabfest Plus to become a member today. You do not want to miss this conversation we had with Emily Wilson. Slate.com/Gabfest Plus to become a member. That is our show for today. The Gabfest is produced by Shana Roth. Our researcher is Julie Hugan. Ethan Oberman also produced today. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is a VP of Audio for Slate. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson and David Plotz, thanks for listening. Some of us will talk to you next week. We're actually entering our sort of summer vacation time, so you're going to have various different lineups on the Gabfest for a couple of weeks. But you'll always hear from some of us. Thanks, y'all. Bye-bye.